"If I share my cookie, will you stay?" asked the Mafia boss's silent daughter to a woman running from her past on the red-eye flight. The late-night flight from New York to Los Angeles was quiet, the cabin dim with shadows pooling between rows of seats. In economy class, passengers settled in, some already asleep, some lost in screens or silence. No one welcomed the sound of children. Mila, 4 years old, sat in the middle seat, legs tucked beneath her. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around a pale, solemn face. In her lap she clutched a star-shaped cookie tin, its edges worn from 2 years of holding. Beside her, Dominic, her father, wore a black tailored suit, his jaw tight, his gray eyes scanning his phone. He answered a message, then another. He hadn't looked at her since boarding. They were supposed to be on the private jet, but a mechanical failure had grounded it in New York. Flying commercial was a security risk, his men had warned. Dominic had barely reacted. He never explained. He never apologized. He simply adjusted. Mila didn't mind the cramped seat. She was used to silence. Her father never yelled, but he never sang either. Not anymore. Not since Mommy went away and didn't come back. Mila had learned to disappear in plain sight, to be still, to not ask, to not speak. She hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. The doctors called it selective mutism. Dominic called it his greatest failure, though he never said it out loud. The window seat was empty. Mila glanced at it, then back at her cookie tin. Her small fingers traced the star on the lid. Inside were sugar cookies shaped like stars, the last batch her mother had ever made. She had never shared them, not once. She was saving them, not for later, but in case someone came who might stay. I hope someone nice sits there, someone like Mommy. Just as the engines began to hum, a woman hurried down the aisle. She carried a baby swaddled in a faded blanket, pressed close to her chest. Her coat was thin, her jeans worn at the knees. Auburn hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and beneath the dim cabin light, a faint bruise shadowed her jawline, half hidden by makeup. Her green eyes were tired, watchful, scared, yet something in her didn't seem broken, just stretched, just surviving. "Excuse me," she whispered, voice barely steady, and slipped into the window seat beside Mila. Settling in, she adjusted the baby, maybe 8 months old, sleeping fitfully against her shoulder. The scent of baby lotion and exhaustion clung to her. She fastened the seatbelt with trembling fingers, then gently patted the baby's back. A quiet hum followed, a lullaby, so soft it was almost a breath. Mila turned her head. She stared not rudely, just curiously. The woman's hum was low and slow. It reminded Mila of something she had forgotten, like the sound of rain on windows, like arms that held without squeezing, like a voice that used to sing her to sleep, before the bad men came, before Mommy fell and didn't get up. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She listened. Dominic kept scrolling, his phone glowing against his face, unaware. He didn't see Mila glance at the woman, or how her fingers for the first time in 2 years slowly lifted the lid of the cookie tin. Inside lay one perfect star-shaped cookie, resting on a napkin yellowed with time. Mila picked it up with both hands. She turned. She offered it to the woman beside her. Her voice was barely more than a breath, rough, unused. The first word she had spoken since the night her mother died. "If I share my cookie, will you stay? And if this story satisfies your soul, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment." Eve went perfectly still. The child's question rang inside her head like a bell, gentle, yet piercing all the way through. She looked down into the little girl's dark brown eyes too large for that small face, too sorrowful for someone her age, and in that instant, Eve no longer saw Mila at all. She saw Lucas, her son, 4 years old, hair the color of sunlit gold, a smile like early morning, the child who had asked her the same question, in a different way, on the last night before everything collapsed. "Mommy, if I'm good, you'll stay with me forever, won't you?" She had promised. She had said yes, and then she had broken that promise, not because she wanted to, but because fate had stolen the chance for her to keep her word. Eve's hands trembled. She tried to swallow the tight knot in her throat. A star-shaped cookie lay in the little girl's hand, pale gold, as if it had been guarded for a very long time, not to eat, but to wait for someone worthy of sharing it. Eve understood that feeling. She, too, had waited for so long, waiting for a safe place, waiting for a moment of peace, waiting for someone to look at her without judgment or threat. She had never found it. Until now, when a stranger child offered her a cookie and asked if she would stay. Eve slowly reached out. Her fingers touched the cookie, soft and careful, as if she were touching something sacred. She accepted it with both hands. Then she lowered herself, eye level with Mila. Her voice went rough, but it held warmth. "I will stay as long as you need me to." Mila did not smile, but her eyes brightened. For the first time in a very long time, like a candle being lit in a dark room, the little girl said nothing more. She only tilted her head and leaned into Eve's shoulder, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. Lily stirred in Eve's arms but did not wake. The warmth of the two children seeped through the thin fabric of her clothes, and Eve realized she was crying, silently, only quiet tears sliding down her cheeks and falling into the dark. Dominic heard it, not Eve's crying, but the voice he had believed he would never hear again. He lifted his head from the glow of his phone screen, his heart slowing for a beat, then racing twice as fast. Mila, his daughter, talking. He had heard it clearly. "If I share my cookie, will you stay?" 7 words, 7 simple words. But to Dominic, they were the 7 words he had prayed for across 730 days. He had hired the best psychologists money could find. He had taken Mila to every doctor, every therapist. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to bring his daughter back. No one could do it. No treatment worked. And now, a stranger woman with tangled hair and tired eyes had done what his entire world could not. Dominic looked over. Mila was leaning against the woman's shoulder, eyes half closed, one hand still gripping the cookie box, the other resting on the woman's arm, as if she were afraid the woman might vanish, as if this were a dream, and she did not want to wake up. He wanted to come closer. He wanted to say something. He wanted to hold his daughter, to ask if she remembered her father, to tell her he was sorry. Sorry he had not protected her mother. Sorry he had not known how to heal his child. But he could not. His feet felt nailed to the floor. His throat tightened. Because he was afraid. Afraid that if he spoke, the miracle would dissolve. Afraid that Mila would fall silent again. Would become that small shadow without a voice he had lived with for 2 years. Dominic Salvatore, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, stood frozen on a commercial flight, not daring to breathe too hard, simply because he feared his daughter would stop speaking. He looked at the stranger woman. She did not look back. She only sat there, quiet, one arm holding a newborn, the other left still for Mila to hold. She did nothing at all. She was simply there, simply present, and somehow, that simplicity was the one thing Dominic had never been able to give his daughter. Dominic did not move. He sat there, his phone still in his hand, but the screen had gone dark long ago, the light fading as if it, too, understood that nothing mattered more than this moment. Mila was whispering. His daughter, the child who had been silent for 2 years, was whispering something into the ear of a stranger woman. Dominic could not make out the words. He only saw Mila's small lips moving, saw her tip her head, saw that tiny hand still gripping the woman's arm as if afraid she might drift away. He wanted to move closer. He wanted to hear what his daughter was saying. He wanted to know which words were leaving the mouth he had believed had forgotten how to move. But his legs would not obey. A strange fear held him in place, something Dominic Salvatore had never been familiar with. He was afraid. Afraid that if he inched forward even a little, the miracle would shatter. Afraid that Mila would turn and look at him and those eyes would be empty again, the way they were every day. Afraid that everything was only a hallucination belonging to a desperate father. 2 years. 730 days. Every morning he woke up. He looked into his daughter's eyes and waited. Waiting for a daddy. Waiting for an innocent question. Waiting for anything at all. But Mila only met him with eyes too old for her face and then turned away. Silence. Always silence. He had hired a psychologist from Switzerland. He had taken Mila to the best therapy center in Manhattan. He had tried music therapy, art therapy, even animal-assisted therapy. Nothing worked. The specialist said Mila would speak when she was ready, but 2 years passed and she still was not ready. Not until now. Not until a tired woman with bruises on her face and a small child in her arms sat down beside his daughter. Dominic looked at her. Really looked for the first time. She was not beautiful in any dazzling way. No lipstick, no jewelry, nothing at all but exhaustion written into every line of her features. Yet, there was something about her. A gentleness that did not try. A presence that did not demand. She did nothing special. She only sat there. She only hummed a lullaby under her breath. She only let Mila hold her hand. And somehow, That simple thing had broken the wall Dominic had spent years trying and failing to crack. The overhead announcement burst through his thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the inconvenience, but due to a technical issue, we will be delayed on the runway for approximately 2 hours. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will update you as soon as we have more information." A wave of sighs rolled through the cabin. A man behind Dominic swore under his breath. A woman in office clothes made a phone call, her voice sharp as she announced she would be late for her meeting. A child in the row ahead began to cry, the thin, piercing sound filling the cramped space. The air inside the cabin seemed to thicken, hotter, more stifling. The ventilation system hummed steadily, but it was not cool enough. The smells of old coffee, sweat, and the sour edge of trapped frustration blended together. Normally, Dominic would have made a call. He would have ordered someone to fix it. He would have found a way off this miserable commercial flight at any cost. But he did nothing. He only sat still, his eyes fixed on Mila. His daughter did not react to the delay announcement. She did not fidget, did not complain, did not shift in annoyance. She kept her head against the woman's shoulder, one hand holding the cookie box, the other resting on the woman's arm, as if the world outside did not exist, as if the 2-hour delay were a gift rather than an inconvenience. And perhaps it was. For Dominic, these 2 hours were 2 hours in which he could watch his daughter come alive again. 2 hours in which he did not have to do anything, did not have to command, did not have to control. He only had to sit here and witness. The woman seemed not to mind the announcement either. The baby in her arms stirred and made a soft, needy sound, and she adjusted her posture at once, patting the baby's back, her mouth still humming. The lullaby had no clear words, only a gentle rise and fall, light as wind passing by. Mila lifted her head and looked at her, and then she did something that made Dominic's heart tighten. Mila began to hum along, not singing, not really, only small, hesitant sounds, as if her throat were learning again how to make noise after too long in silence. The woman stopped for a second. She looked down at Mila, and Dominic saw her eyes shine, not with fear, not with irritation, but with feeling, pure and unguarded. She did not know Mila had been silent for 2 years. She did not know this was the first sound Mila had made since the night her mother died. But by instinct, she understood that this moment mattered, and she kept humming, more gently, more slowly, inviting Mila to join her. Dominic sat in the dim pocket of the middle row, both hands gripping the seat, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something break open inside his chest. Not pain, hope, the kind of hope he had buried long ago, now pushing up again, fragile and trembling, but real. Half an hour passed. Dominic was still sitting there, but his patience was thinning by degrees, not because the flight was delayed, not because of the stifling air or the wail of the child in the row ahead, but because he could not bear simply sitting here and watching his daughter in the arms of a stranger. He was her father. He had been beside her for the past 2 years, even if in his own way. He had done everything to protect her, to give her the best life, to make up for what had been lost. And now a stranger woman appeared, sat down next to Mila for exactly 30 minutes, and the girl had spoken to her, had hummed along with her, had leaned into her shoulder as if it were the safest place in the world, while he sat 1 row away, and that distance suddenly felt as wide as a chasm. Dominic drew a slow, deep breath. He told himself he had to stay calm, that this was a good thing, that his daughter was speaking and that was all that mattered. But a part of him, the part he did not want to name, was jealous of a woman who had nothing while he had everything and still could not give his daughter what she truly needed. He stood and stepped toward Mila's row, trying to make his voice gentle, a thing he was not used to doing. "Mila." The girl did not react, still leaning on the woman's shoulder, eyes half closed. "Mila, sweetheart." Dominic perched on the edge of the seat, lowering his voice even further. "Come sit with Daddy." He held out his hand and waited. He had done this hundreds of times over 2 years, extending his hand toward his daughter, inviting her closer, hoping this time would be different. And hundreds of times Mila had remained silent, never refusing, never accepting, only staring at his hand with those blank eyes and then turning away. But this time was different. Mila opened her eyes. She looked at her father's hand, then up at his face, and then, slowly and with unmistakable certainty, she shook her head, not with the indifference of before, but with a deliberate refusal. Her small hand tightened around the woman's arm as if afraid someone would pull her away. No. 1 word. Only 1 word. And it cut through Dominic like a bullet. His daughter had just said no to him. For the first time in her life, the first time she had actively refused him, actively chosen someone else instead of him. Dominic pulled his hand back. It felt as though someone had driven a knife into his chest and twisted it slowly, painfully, not out of anger, but because he understood. He understood that she was not refusing him because she hated him. She was refusing him because he was not what she needed. He could give Mila everything in the world, a mansion, nannies, expensive toys, absolute security, but he could not give her what this stranger woman was giving her: presence, gentleness, a lullaby with no reason, an embrace that demanded nothing in return. Eve felt the man's gaze on her. She lifted her head, and for the first time she truly looked at him, not the quick glance she had given him when she first boarded, but a careful, steady look, and what she saw made a chill run through her. This man was dangerous. She knew it at once, by the survival instinct sharpened over 3 years of living with Ryan. Steel, cold, gray eyes, a hard, square jaw. The way he sat, the way he moved, the way he looked, everything about him carried a dark authority, an absolute control ordinary people did not have. His black suit was too perfect for a night flight. The watch on his wrist cost more than the apartment she had once rented. And the way he looked at her, as if assessing her, calculating, deciding whether she was a threat. She had seen that look before. In Ryan's eyes, in the eyes of Ryan's friends, powerful men who believed they could control everything, even human beings. Eve wanted to stand, to lift Lily and run as far from this man as she could. Her instincts were screaming that this was trouble, that she should not get involved, that she already had enough problems without adding more. But then she looked down. Mila was holding her hand, that tiny hand, ice-cold, trembling. Mila's eyes lifted to hers, and in those eyes Eve saw a familiar fear, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being alone, the fear she herself had carried for years. "Please," Mila whispered, her voice thick and rough, "don't go." And Eve understood she could not leave, not because she was not afraid of that man, but because this child needed her. This child had chosen her, had trusted her, had opened to her in a way she had not opened to anyone else, not even to her own father. Eve squeezed Mila's hand gently. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Dominic stood there and watched it all. He saw his daughter holding the stranger woman's hand. He saw Mila begging her to stay. He saw the woman promise she would not go, and he did not know what he was supposed to feel. Grateful that someone could draw his daughter back into the world, or hurt that the someone was not him. Maybe both, maybe neither. He only knew he could not let this woman disappear. Not for himself, but for Mila, because for the first time in 2 years, his daughter was living again. Dominic closed his eyes. Seated in the cramped airplane chair, he let memory pull him back to that night, the night everything changed, the night he lost everything. 2 years ago, the mansion on Long Island, winter. Snow had fallen that night, soft white flakes drifting past the windows and laying a silver coat over the garden. Elena was sitting on the living room rug with Mila curled in her lap. They were making cookies. Flour dusted Mila's cheek, clung to Elena's hair, even speckled the star-patterned apron the little girl loved. Laughter filled the room. Elena sang a lullaby in Italian, her voice clear as a bell. Mila babbled along, getting every word wrong, and no one cared. Dominic stood in the doorway and watched. He had just come home after a long day, a day of tense meetings, ruthless decisions, the kind of things he never wanted Elena to know. But the moment he saw his wife and daughter, it all dissolved. This was why he did everything. This was the small heaven he had built and would protect at any cost. "Daddy!" Mila spotted him and her whole face lit up. She ran to him, both hands sticky with flour, and threw her arms around his leg. "Daddy, look, Mommy and I made star cookies." Dominic bent down and lifted his daughter. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of butter and sugar. They smelled delicious. Principessa. Elena rose and came to his side. She put a hand on his cheek and smiled, the smile he had loved from the first day he met her in a small cafe in Rome, the smile that had saved him from the dark. "You're home early. I missed you," he said, and he meant it. For a moment they stood there, the three of them held together. Snow kept falling outside. The fireplace kept burning warm. The smell of cookies stayed sweet in the air, and Dominic thought this was perfect, that even a life soaked in sin and shadow could still contain a moment like this. He was wrong. The sound of shattering glass tore the piece apart. Not one crash, but many at once, from windows all through the house, and then gunfire, shouting, running feet. Dominic reacted on instinct. He shoved Elena and Mila down to the floor and covered them with his body. His hand yanked the gun from beneath his coat. "Stay down," he shouted. "Don't move!" But everything happened too fast, too chaotic. The attackers poured in from every direction, black masks, rifles, at least 10 men, maybe more. Dominic's guards fought back, but they were overwhelmed. Gunshots cracked again and again. Bodies fell. The air burned with the bitter sting of powder. Dominic dropped 2 men rushing toward them, then 3, then 4, but he could not be everywhere at once. He could not protect everyone. Dominic, Elena's scream. He turned his head, and time seemed to stop. An attacker stood behind Elena, the muzzle pressed toward her head. Mila was in her mother's arms, eyes wide with terror. "Drop the gun, Salvatore," the attacker said, his voice cold as ice, a Russian edge to the sound. "Or I blow her brains out." Dominic went rigid. He locked eyes with Elena. She was crying, but not from fear for herself. She was afraid for Mila, for him. "Drop it," the attacker roared. Dominic lowered the gun, slowly, carefully. He would find a way. He always found a way. He only needed a few more seconds. "Good," the attacker laughed. "Kozlov sends his regards." Then he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. Elena fell. Blood, too much blood. Dark red on the pale rug, dark red on the floral dress she was wearing, dark red on Mila's hands. Mila screamed, a sound that split the night open, split Dominic's soul. The scream of a 2-year-old child watching her mother die in front of her. Dominic did not remember what happened after that. He only remembered red, the red of blood, the red of rage, the red of a frenzy he could not control. When he came back to himself, every attacker was dead. His hands were slick with blood, not only theirs but his own, from wounds he had not even felt. None of it mattered. He crawled to Elena. She lay there with her eyes open, but she was no longer seeing anything. Her lips were parted as if she had been about to say something. "Maybe I love you. Maybe take care of Mila. Maybe I forgive you." He would never know. "Elena," he whispered. "Elena, please, please." But she did not answer. She never answered again. And Mila sat beside her mother, hands stained with blood, eyes wide and empty. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not speak. She only sat there like a broken doll. "Mila," Dominic called. "Mila, sweetheart, look at Daddy." She did not react. Not even a little, as if her soul had left her body and followed her mother to a place Dominic could not reach. From that night on, Mila did not speak a single word. From that night on, Dominic carried a wound that would never heal, not in flesh, but in his chest where his heart used to beat. He killed the attackers. He wiped out their entire organization. He hunted Kozlov to the ends of the earth. But he did not save his wife. He did not protect his daughter from the darkness. Because of him. All because of him. Because of the life he chose. Because of the empire he built. Because of the enemies he made. Elena died because she was the wife of Dominic Salvatore. Mila went silent because she was the daughter of Dominic Salvatore. And he had to live with that truth every day, every night, every moment. Dominic opened his eyes. The plane was still sitting on the runway. The noise of passengers still hummed all around him. And Mila, his daughter, was still leaning into the shoulder of the stranger woman, small fingers locked around her arm. He looked at the child, and in that moment he swore to himself he would not lose her again, no matter what it cost. Time moved sluggishly inside the cabin. The overhead lights had been dimmed, leaving only a faint wash of pale gold slipping down through the cracks beneath the luggage bins. Most of the passengers had drifted into sleep, or at least into the strained attempt at it, while the steady hum of the engines became a dull, unchanging lullaby that kept everyone hovering in a fog. But Mila did not sleep. She sat, leaned into Eve's shoulder, eyes wide in the dark, her fingers still resting on the star-shaped cookie tin. She was thinking about something, and Eve could feel it in the slight tension of that small body, in the way Mila's breathing sped up just a little. Eve did not ask. She only sat still, one arm holding Lily fast asleep, the other left quiet so Mila could keep her grip. She had learned that sometimes silence was the greatest gift you could offer someone. Not the cold, distant kind of silence, but the silence of a person willing to wait, willing to listen, willing to be there without asking for anything. Mila shifted. Slowly she opened the cookie tin, and the lid made a small click in the night like stillness. Inside, on a layer of paper that had yellowed with time, were star-shaped cookies. A few had chipped corners. A few had lost their first bright gold color. But all of them had been stacked carefully, guarded like treasures. "Mommy made these," Mila whispered, her voice rough, as if her throat had forgotten how to make sound smoothly. Before the bad men came, Eve did not flinch. She did not ask who the bad men were. She only nodded once, small and steady, letting Mila know she was listening. Mila touched one cookie, her tiny fingertip tracing the edge of the star. Mommy smelled like vanilla. And flowers. She used to sing when she baked. The girl paused, as if she were trying to pull back a melody that had faded. I don't remember the song anymore. I try to remember, but I can't. Eve felt her heart tighten. She knew that feeling. The feeling of clawing at a memory of someone you have lost while time keeps gently erasing the details anyway. A voice, a smile, a scent, all of it thinning year by year no matter how hard you fight to hold it. Our house was big, Mila went on, her voice growing smaller, as if she were telling the story more to herself than to Eve. There was a garden. Mommy planted roses, red ones. She said they were the color of love. Mila took a shaky breath. I don't like red anymore. Eve did not ask why. She did not need to. She could guess. A 2-year-old who had seen her mother lying in a pool of red blood. Of course she would hate red. The red of roses, the red of love, the red of death. That night, Mila whispered, so softly it was almost nothing. Mommy was holding me. We were making cookies. Then the loud noises came, and the men in black. And Mommy fell down. She stopped. Her small body began to tremble. She didn't get up. I called her. I called and called, but she didn't answer. Eve could not hold back anymore. She leaned down and wrapped her free arm around Mila, drawing the girl into her chest, saying nothing, promising nothing, only holding on, holding tight as if her arms could shield the child from the memories flooding in. Mila went rigid for a moment, as if she was not used to being touched, and then, slowly, she sagged, her head dropping against Eve's breast, her hands still clamped around the cookie tin. She did not cry. Maybe the tears had dried up 2 years ago. Maybe she had forgotten how to cry the way she had forgotten how to speak. But her body shook, shaking like a leaf in wind, and Eve understood that this was Mila's way of crying without tears. Eve began to sing, not any particular song, only a melody that had lived in her since childhood. The song her mother had sung, the song she had sung to Lucas every night before sleep. Her voice was soft, a little trembling, imperfect but true. Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. Mila lifted her head. Her eyes widened, surprised, and then the miracle happened. The girl's lips moved, trying to follow the tune. No words, only hesitant humming. But it was music, the first music in 2 years. Lily chose that moment to wake. The baby stirred in Eve's arms and then began to cry, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet cabin. A few passengers shifted. Someone sighed. Eve did not care. She kept singing, one hand patting Lily's back, the other holding Mila close. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. Mila sat up a little. She looked at Lily with curiosity, head tipped to one side, and then she did something that made Eve's throat close. Mila reached out and touched Lily's cheek with a light, careful finger. Don't cry, Mila whispered to the baby. The nice lady is singing. Listen. Lily paused for a heartbeat, round eyes fixed on Mila, and then the baby let out a small giggle, reaching toward the bigger girl with her hands. Mila did not smile, but her eyes softened, and something almost warm appeared on the face that was so often locked in coldness. Eve kept singing, her voice shaking more now with feeling. She sat there in the cramped airplane cabin, holding a stranger child who had finally opened her mouth to speak of the most terrifying night of her life, while soothing the little sister who had just awakened. 2 children, one not hers by blood, one not hers by law, and yet in this moment both of them needed her, and she was here. She would be here, at least for tonight. Dominic watched it all from the seat beside them. He watched the stranger woman hold his daughter. He watched Mila touch the baby's cheek. He watched the 3 of them curled together like a small family in the middle of a crowded plane, and he felt something in his chest crack open. Not pain, but longing. The longing to be part of that picture, to sit close, to hold his daughter, to belong somewhere that was not filled with darkness and blood. But he did not move. He only sat there in the shadow of the middle row and wondered whether it was already too late for him to learn how to be the father Mila needed. Eve closed her eyes, the lullaby's melody still lingering softly in her throat. Mila had drifted off in her arms, her breathing steady and warm. Lily had fallen asleep again too, her tiny fingers curled tight around a lock of Eve's hair. But Eve could not sleep. Mila's story had stirred something inside her. A memory she had tried to bury, a wound she thought had healed but had never truly closed. Lucas, her son, 4 years old, hair the color of summer sunshine, clear blue eyes like an open sky, a wide, toothy grin every time he saw his mother come home after a long shift at the hospital. He loved chocolate chip cookies more than anything in the world. He loved being read to before bed. He loved asking why about everything, from why the sky was blue to why Daddy came home late and smelled strange. Eve remembered Lucas's small hand wrapped around hers each morning as she walked him to preschool. She remembered his bright voice asking, "Mommy, why is the moon following us?" when they drove home in the evening. She remembered the way he hugged an old, worn teddy bear every night, the one Eve had bought at a thrift shop because she could not afford a new one. She remembered the way he smelled after a bath, baby soap and innocence. And she remembered that night, the night everything ended. Ryan came home late as usual. He was a police officer, a respected man in the department, the kind of man everyone thought was a hero. But Eve knew the truth. She knew the whiskey on his breath every night. She knew the bruises she had to hide under makeup when she went to work. She knew the sound of things shattering and the sound of shouting in his drunken rages. She knew the fear in Lucas's eyes every time he heard his father's car pull into the driveway. That night, Ryan demanded to take Lucas out for ice cream. Eve protested. He had been drinking. She had seen the half-empty whiskey bottle on the table. But Ryan did not accept being told no. He never had. He yanked Lucas out of Eve's arms, shoved her to the floor, and dragged the crying child out to the car. "Ryan, please," Eve screamed, stumbling after them. "You've been drinking. Let me drive." But he did not listen. He never listened. They found the car an hour later, smashed through the highway median, flipped 3 times, crushed against the shoulder. Ryan survived with a few scratches. The airbag had saved him. But Lucas had been in the back seat. No airbag, no child safety seat, because Ryan had never bothered with things like that. Lucas died on the spot, 4 years old, alone, in the dark, in the sound of shattering glass and the stink of gasoline. Eve did not remember how she got to the hospital. She only remembered the white sheet over that small body. She remembered the icy hand she clung to and could not release. She remembered herself screaming, sobbing, begging someone to wake her son up, and she remembered Ryan's cold eyes as he stood outside the room. Not a single tear. There was no punishment for Ryan Mitchell, no prosecution, no justice. He was a police officer. His colleagues investigated the crash. They concluded it was an unfortunate accident caused by slick road conditions. No one mentioned the blood alcohol level. No one mentioned that he had been drunk behind the wheel. No one mentioned Lucas, the 4-year-old who died because of his father's carelessness. Eve wanted to scream, to expose him, to demand justice for her son, but she had no voice, no power, no money for a lawyer, and Ryan threatened her. If she opened her mouth, he would make sure she never opened it again. 3 weeks after Lucas's funeral, Eve swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. She did not want to die, or maybe she did. She could no longer tell. She only wanted to stop feeling, stop remembering, stop waking up every morning and realizing Lucas was no longer there. Stop looking into her son's empty room, where the teddy bear still lay on the pillow, waiting for an owner who would never come back. But she did not die. A neighbor found her in time. She woke up in the hospital, her throat bitter with charcoal, and her mother's tear-soaked face beside the bed. Her mother, Margaret Carter, the woman who had raised Eve alone, the woman who had worked 3 jobs at once so her daughter could go to college, the woman who had cried on the day Eve married Ryan because she sensed something was wrong, but could not stop it because Eve had loved blindly. "You can't leave me," her mother said, gripping Eve's hand. "You can't leave us." That was when Eve learned her mother was pregnant, at the age of 47, an unexpected miracle, or perhaps a mistake, depending on how you looked at it. Her mother would not say who the father was. Maybe it was a brief affair. Maybe it was one lonely night searching for warmth. Eve did not ask. It did not matter. What mattered was that Eve had a reason to live, to help her mother, to wait for the baby sister who was about to be born. But fate was cruel again. Eve's mother died giving birth to Lily, postpartum hemorrhage. The doctors said they did everything they could, but everything they could still was not enough. Margaret Carter was gone, leaving behind a red-faced newborn and a daughter who had lost everything. Eve held Lily for the first time in the recovery room, tears falling onto the baby's tiny face. She did not know how to be a mother again. She was afraid of loving and then losing, afraid she would not be enough, afraid history would repeat itself. But Lily looked up at her, eyes the same blue as her mother's, and the baby's tiny hand closed around Eve's finger as if it were saying, "Sister, don't leave me." And Eve did not leave. She adopted Lily, even though the paperwork listed her as Lily's sister, not her mother. She left Ryan's house, slipping out in the night while he was drunk. She ran, from one city to another, from one job to another, but Ryan always found her, always appeared, always threatened. "You're mine, Eve. You'll always be mine. And if I can't have you, no one will." Eve opened her eyes. The plane was still hushed. Mila was still asleep in her arms. Lily's breathing was still even, and in the seat beside them, the man in the black suit was watching her with an expression she could not decode. She did not know who he was. She did not know how dangerous he might be. But she knew one thing: this child, Mila, had lost her mother too. She carried wounds no one could see. She was searching for someone to hold on to in the dark, and Eve understood more than anyone. The cabin sank into darkness and silence. Most of the passengers were asleep now, light snores and steady breaths folding into the low, constant hum of the engines. The overhead lights had been shut off completely, leaving only a few small glows from entertainment screens no one was watching. Time felt suspended in this narrow space, hanging between night and day, between New York and Los Angeles, between the past and the future. Mila was sleeping deeply, curled in Eve's arms, her cheek pressed to Eve's shoulder, one hand still wrapped tightly around the star-shaped cookie tin. She looked so small in sleep that it hurt to see, fragile in a way that made Eve's chest ache. The worry lines that lived on her forehead had eased, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly as if she were drifting through a good dream, perhaps dreaming of her mother, of star cookies, of the time before the bad men came. Lily was sleeping too, quiet in Eve's other arm. The baby breathed evenly, her tiny fist still clutching a strand of her sister's hair as if, even in sleep, she feared being left behind. 2 children, one 4 years old, one 8 months, both motherless in their own way, both finding comfort in the arms of the same woman. Eve sat perfectly still, afraid to move for fear of waking them. Her arms had gone numb long ago. Her back ached from the cramped position, but she did not care. She only sat there in the dark, listening to the children breathe, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, and trying not to think about what was waiting for her in Los Angeles. A shadow appeared beside her. Eve lifted her head. Dominic was standing there in the narrow aisle between the rows. He did not speak. He only held out a bottle of water, one of the small airline bottles, cold and still sealed. Eve hesitated for a second. She was not used to accepting anything from strange men. Experience had taught her that nothing was free, that every gift came with a price, but her throat was dry after hours of singing, and the gray eyes of this man held no threat, no demand, only exhaustion, and something else she could not name. She took the water. Their fingers brushed for an instant, and Eve felt a faint jolt run through her. She pulled her hand back quickly, twisted the cap off one-handed, and took a small sip. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough. Dominic nodded. He did not leave. He did not sit down. He only stood there in the dark, looking at his daughter asleep in a stranger's arms. And then their eyes met. For the first time, truly. Not the quick glance from when she first boarded, not the assessing look from when Dominic tried to pull Mila away. This was the look of 2 people trying to read each other, trying to understand, trying to decide who the other was and whether trust was even possible. What did Eve see in Dominic's gray eyes? She saw darkness. She saw power. She saw the danger she had felt from the beginning. But she also saw pain. She saw loss. She saw a father desperate to find a way back to his daughter without knowing how. She saw a man who had lost something precious and had never recovered. And Dominic, what did he see in Eve's green eyes? He saw exhaustion, not the kind that came from one sleepless night, but the kind that seeped into bone and spirit and every living cell. He saw the bruise along her jaw, clearer now as her makeup had worn away. He saw the way she kept flicking her gaze toward the window as if she were waiting for someone to follow. He saw her hands tremble whenever a loud sound rose. He saw the stare of hunted prey, always alert, always ready to run. Dominic knew that stare. He had seen it in the eyes of people he had protected before. Women fleeing violent husbands, witnesses fleeing gangs, innocent people dragged into a criminal world with no way out. This woman was running. Dominic was certain of it. She was running from someone, from something. The thin coat, the worn shoes, the scant luggage, the baby in her arms, the bruise on her face, all of it told a story without a single spoken word. And Dominic realized something strange. He wanted to know that story. Wanted to know who had hurt her. Wanted to know what she was running from. Not out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, something older. The protective instinct he had thought had died with Elena. He said nothing. Neither did she. They only looked at each other in silence, Two strangers carrying wounds no one could see, connected by a child sleeping soundly between them. Then Dominic nodded once more, turned, and went back to his seat. But before he sat down, he looked back at Eve one last time, and in that look, Eve read a wordless message. I see you, I know you're running, and I won't let anyone hurt you. Eve did not know why, but she believed it, if only for this moment, if only on this flight. She believed that the stranger man with steel-cold gray eyes would not harm her, at least not tonight. She closed her eyes, tightened her hold around Mila and Lily, and for the first time in months, she felt something almost like safety. The sound of wheels meeting the runway pulled Eve out of that half-dreaming haze. The plane shuddered lightly, then began to slow, the engines giving one last roar before settling into a softer, steady murmur. The cabin lights snapped on, and a flight attendant's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Local time is 5:45 in the morning. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. Passengers began to stir, stretching, opening overhead bins. Voices rose, phones lit up, a few relieved sighs from people who had finally reached the end of a long flight. Ordinary life returned. But for Eve, nothing was ordinary at all. Mila shifted in Eve's arms. The little girl opened her eyes, dark brown, dulled with sleep. For a moment she looked around as if she could not remember where she was. Then her gaze locked onto Eve, and panic flared in her eyes. She realized the flight was over, and that meant this woman would leave. No, Mila whispered, trembling. No, no, no. Eve felt her heart tighten. She tried to sit up, tried to find words that could make sense of what was happening, but Mila had already clamped onto her hand, tiny fingers clinging as if it were the only life raft in a vast ocean. Don't go, Mila begged, her voice growing louder, more desperate. Please, please don't go. Nearby passengers began to turn and look. A few frowned in irritation. An older woman stared at Eve with judgment, as if Eve were doing something wrong to the child. Eve wanted to explain that this was not her daughter, that she was only a stranger, that she did not know why this child was holding on to her like this. But she could not speak, because when she looked into Mila's eyes she saw Lucas. She saw her son in her nightmares, gripping her hand and pleading. Mommy, don't leave me alone. I have to go, sweetie, Eve whispered, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart broke apart. I have to take care of my sister. We don't live here. We don't. Take me with you. Mila cut in, eyes wide with hope and desperation. I'll be good. I promise. I'll be so good. Just don't leave me. Eve did not know what to say. She glanced toward Dominic, searching for help. He had stood up and was in the aisle now, gray eyes on the scene with something Eve could not read. Pain, jealousy, or something deeper. Miss, Dominic said, his voice low and controlled. He stepped closer and dropped his tone so only Eve and Mila could hear. I know you're running from someone. I saw it in your eyes. The bruise on your jaw, the way you flinch at every sound. Eve went still. Every survival instinct in her screamed to run, to scoop up Lily and get as far from this man as possible. But Mila was gripping her hand, and Eve could not move. Whoever you're running from, Dominic continued, even quieter now, they won't find you with me. I can protect you. I can give you a place to stay, a job, safety, anything you need. Eve looked at him, really looked. This was a powerful man. She could see it in the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way everything about him radiated control and certainty. Men like that did not offer help for free. There was always a price. Why? She asked, her voice gone cold. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Dominic looked at Mila. His daughter was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks, her mouth shaping silent pleas between sobs. He looked back at Eve. Because for 2 years my daughter hasn't spoken a word, hasn't smiled, hasn't cried. And tonight, with you, she did all three. He paused and drew a breath. I don't know what you did, but you brought her back, and for that, I would give you anything. Eve felt her heart wobble. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to accept the offer. She wanted a safe place to hide from Ryan, to raise Lily, to start over. But she had trusted a man once. She had trusted Ryan when he said he would love her forever. She had trusted him when he promised he would change, and she had paid with her son's life. I can't, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I'm sorry. I can't trust you. I can't trust anyone. Slowly, she pried Mila's hand off her arm, one finger at a time. Mila stared at her, betrayal and pain flooding her face. You promised, Mila whispered. You said you'd stay. I know, sweetie, Eve said, her throat thick. I'm so sorry, but I have to go. She stood, lifted Lily into her arms, pulled her bag down from the overhead bin. Every step felt like 1,000 pounds pressing on her. She did not dare look back. She could not bear to meet Mila's eyes. But she heard it. She heard the crying, not the quiet kind, not the restrained sobs. The raw, wailing cry of a child being abandoned, a sound that tore through the air and burst open like a dam breaking after 2 years of holding. Eve froze in the aisle. Around her, passengers watched with every kind of look, judgment, curiosity, irritation, but she did not care. She heard only Mila's cry, the first cry in 2 years, the cry Dominic had been waiting for across 730 days and nights. Daddy, Mila screamed through sobs. Daddy, don't let her go. Please, make her stay. Eve shut her eyes. Her own tears began to fall. She kept walking toward the aircraft door, step by heavy step, step by painful step. She did not turn back, even as her heart screamed at her to turn back. The bus station was a 20-minute walk from the airport. Eve walked because she did not have enough money for a taxi. Lily fussed the whole way, hungry and exhausted, and Eve could only hold the baby tight against her chest, whispering meaningless, soothing sounds as she moved beneath the gray Los Angeles sky at early morning. The station was nearly empty. Only a few homeless people huddled on the benches, and one drunk man was muttering at a wall. Eve found a shadowed corner, sat down on an ice-cold plastic seat, and for the first time since leaving the plane, allowed herself to breathe. Then she took out her phone. The screen lit, and Eve's heart seemed to drop into a pit. 47 missed calls, all from the same number, Ryan. She scrolled through the messages, her hands shaking so badly she could barely control her fingers. Where the hell are you? You think you can run from me? I have friends everywhere, Eve. Everywhere. And the last message, sent 20 minutes ago. I know you're in LA. I'm coming for you. And when I find you, you'll wish you were never born. Eve let the phone slip. It dropped into her lap with a small clatter. She looked down at Lily, the baby wailing, her face flushed red with hunger and exhaustion. Eve needed to buy formula, needed to find somewhere to sleep, needed to disappear before Ryan found her. She opened her wallet. $23. That was everything. $23, a crying baby, and a hunter already on his way. Rain began to fall, not a gentle drizzle but a hard downpour, cold drops like needles from the gray sky. Eve pulled her coat over Lily, but the thin fabric could not keep the water out. Within minutes they were both soaked through. Lily cried louder. The sound echoed in the empty space of the station, raw and heart-tearing. A few homeless people glanced over and then looked away. The drunk man kept muttering at the wall. Eve wanted to cry, to scream, to ask why life kept pushing her into corners with no exit. She had lost Lucas, lost her mother, lost everything. And now she was sitting here, drenched, broke, nowhere to go, with a hungry baby and a madman hunting her. Then she remembered Mila. She remembered the dark brown eyes looking at her with hope. She remembered the tiny hand offering a star-shaped cookie, the cookie the girl had guarded for 2 years and never shared with anyone. She remembered the rough, hesitant voice, the first voice after 2 years of silence. If I share my cookie, will you stay? Eve closed her eyes. Rainwater or tears slid down her cheeks, and she could no longer tell which was which. She had promised she would stay. She had said, I will stay as long as you need me to. And then she had left. She had let Mila cry. She had let that child be abandoned again by the person she had trusted. Eve had hated Ryan because he was a liar, because he promised and did not keep his word, because he betrayed her trust and her son's. But what about her? Was she any different? She opened her eyes, looked down at Lily, who had cried herself toward exhaustion, and now only hiccuped weakly, looked out at the white curtain of rain, looked at the phone with 47 missed calls from hell. She had 2 choices: keep running alone, with $23 and no future, or go back and accept help from a stranger man, a man who might be dangerous but might also be her only chance. What had Dominic said? Whoever you're running from, they won't find you with me. Eve did not trust men. She did not trust anyone. But she trusted Mila's eyes. She trusted the way that child had looked at her. She trusted the star-shaped cookie shared like a sacred promise. She stood, lifted Lily into her arms, and began walking back toward the airport. The rain kept falling. The wind stayed cold. But Eve barely felt it anymore. She focused only on each step, each breath, each second carrying her closer to a decision that could change everything. 20 minutes later, she stood at the airport arrivals entrance, soaked to the skin, shivering with cold, Lily rasping from crying in her arms. And she saw it. A sleek black vehicle parked right out front. A luxury SUV with tinted windows. Beside it stood a large man in a black suit holding an umbrella, his eyes sweeping every person coming out of the airport. He was looking for someone. He was looking for her. Eve took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward and stopped in front of the stranger, rain streaming down her face. "I changed my mind," she said, her voice trembling with cold but steady. "I will stay." The man looked at her for a second and then nodded. No questions, no judgment. He only opened the car door, and inside, on the back seat, Mila was sitting there, eyes red from crying, but brightening the instant she saw Eve. "You came back," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and hope. "You really came back." Eve climbed in and sat beside Mila, Lily still in her arms. She did not speak, she only nodded. And when Mila leaned her head against Eve's shoulder, when the door shut, when the SUV began to roll forward, Eve realized something. She did not know where she was going. She did not know what the future would hold. But for the first time in a very long time, she was no longer running alone. Dominic sat in the front passenger seat. Glancing briefly at the phone screen Marcus had silently passed to him. It displayed a preliminary background check, completed in the 20 minutes Eve had walked away. Eve Carter. Registered nurse. No criminal record. No known ties to rival families. It was basic intel, but it was enough to verify she wasn't an assassin sent to finish what Kozlov started. Dominic locked the screen. He was a desperate father, but he wasn't a fool. He never would have let her near his daughter without knowing she was safe. The SUV stopped in front of a massive iron gate. Eve looked through the rain-blurred window and could not believe her eyes. This was not a house. This was a palace. The gate opened slowly, and the vehicle rolled onto a long stretch of stone-paved drive, flanked by perfectly trimmed trees and lawns so green they seemed impossible in the heart of winter. At the end of the drive, the mansion rose like a dream, 3 stories high, a facade of white stone, tall windows catching the gray light of the sky, and everywhere, Eve noticed men in black suits standing guard, alert eyes sweeping the car as it passed. The car came to a stop at the front entrance. The driver, the big man who had waited for her at the airport, got out and opened the door. The rain had eased, leaving only a thin mist in the cold air. Eve stepped down with Lily in her arms, and she felt overwhelmed. She had lived her whole life in cramped apartments, used to low ceilings, cracked walls, neighbors arguing through thin partitions. This place belonged to an entirely different world. The front door opened, and Mila ran out. The little girl shot down the steps like a small bullet, black hair flying, tiny feet moving so fast she nearly tripped. She did not say anything. She ran straight to Eve and wrapped both arms around her legs, pressing her face into Eve's thigh. "You came back," Mila whispered, her voice thick. "You really came back." Eve felt tears rise. She bent down, still holding Lily with one arm, and smoothed Mila's hair with the other. "I promised, didn't I?" she said softly. "I said I'd stay as long as you need me to." Mila lifted her head, dark eyes shining. For the first time, Eve saw a smile on that small face. Not a bright smile, only a faint curve at the corner of her mouth, but it was the first smile in 2 years, and it was more beautiful than anything Eve had ever seen. Dominic stood in the doorway watching. He did not speak, did not interfere. He only stood there, gray eyes following his daughter clinging to the stranger woman, and on his usual hard face there was a flicker of something almost like relief. They brought Eve inside. The interior was even more stunning than the outside. Shining marble floors, a sweeping spiral staircase leading upstairs, crystal chandeliers hanging from a ceiling that seemed impossibly high. Everything spoke of wealth, but not the loud, showy kind. Rather the old, enduring kind, the kind that belonged to families with real power. Dominic led Eve into the living room. He gestured for her to sit on a cream leather sofa, then sat across from her. Mila climbed up beside Eve and leaned her head against Eve's shoulder, refusing to let go even for a second. "You need a place to stay," Dominic said, his voice low and direct. "I need someone for Mila. She hasn't connected with anyone since her mother died. Until you..." He paused, looking at his daughter curled against Eve. "Stay as Mila's companion. You'll have a room, food, everything you need. Lily too. In return, you take care of Mila. That's all." Eve looked at him. "That's all?" she asked, suspicion sharpening her voice. "No strings attached." Dominic nodded. No strings attached. Eve wanted to believe him, but she had lived long enough to know nothing was free. "What do you do?" she asked bluntly. "For a living." Dominic watched her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to say. "Business," he finally answered. "Import, export, real estate, among other things." It was not the full truth, Eve knew that. But she was too tired, too cold, too worn out to press further. She nodded. "Okay, I'll stay." The first days passed like a dream. Eve was shown to a room bigger than any apartment she had ever rented, with a king-size bed, a private bathroom, and a wardrobe filled with new clothes still wearing their tags. Lily had a beautiful crib, toys, formula and diapers stocked for a month. Mila came to Eve's room every morning and every night, and often slept there instead of in her own room. But Eve was not naive. She began to notice the strange things. The men in black suits were everywhere, not only at the gate but inside the house, in the hallways, outside the windows. They did not speak to her, did not look at her, but she knew they were always watching. One night, she woke to a sound and saw through the window a line of black vehicles parked outside, men stepping out with the outline of guns beneath their coats. Another night, she went downstairs for water and heard voices from Dominic's study, words like shipment, territory, eliminate drifting through the half-closed door. Eve was not stupid. She had been a nurse and had seen what violence could do to a human body. She had lived with Ryan and had learned how to recognize dangerous men, and she knew, with growing certainty, that Dominic Salvatore was not merely a businessman. He was Mafia. She had stepped into the den of a crime boss. She had brought Lily into it. She had let Mila, an innocent child, become the thread that tied her to this world. One night, Eve sat on the bed with Lily asleep in her crib, and Mila curled beside her, and she stared out the window. Outside, the men in black suits patrolled. Outside, a world of violence and power moved through the darkness, and she was in the middle of it, with no way out. She could run, but where? Ryan was hunting her. She had no money, nowhere to go, and Mila was sleeping beside her, a small hand gripping Eve's shirt, even in dreams. Eve closed her eyes. She had fled one devil and walked straight into the territory of another, but this devil, at least, did not hit her. This devil, at least, had a daughter who needed her. This devil, at least, had given her shelter when the whole world shut its doors. It was too late to turn back. Eve knew that. All she could do was keep going, step into the dark, and hope that somewhere ahead there would be light. A week passed, then two, and Eve began to witness a small miracle unfolding right in front of her. Mila started to speak, not in long conversations, not in complicated stories, just single words at first: hungry, sleepy, cookie, and then, little by little, short sentences: "I want juice. Can we go outside? Tell me a story." Each word, each sentence was like a tiny flower opening in a barren desert. Every sound that left those small lips was a victory over 2 years of silence. But Mila spoke only to Eve, only to her. With everyone else in the house, she remained as mute as before. With the housekeepers, the cooks, the guards, Mila did not make a sound. And with Dominic, with her own father, she kept her distance, still watching him with eyes too old for her face, still not saying a single word. Eve knew it hurt Dominic. She saw the way he looked on when Mila whispered something into Eve's ear. She saw him lingering in doorways, waiting, hoping. She saw the way his shoulders sagged each time his daughter passed him without looking. But he said nothing. He did not complain. He did not demand. He simply let Eve do what she was doing. And from a distance he was quietly grateful. Mila began to draw. Eve found a box of colored pencils in the playroom and handed it to her, expecting nothing. But Mila sat down and began to draw, focused and silent, as if she were pouring out what could not be spoken. The first pictures were all black. Black sky, black house, black people. Eve looked at them and felt her heart twist. This was Mila's inner world, dark and cold, with no light. But then, slowly, color began to appear. One day Mila drew a flower, yellow, tiny, tucked into the corner of a pitch-black page, but it was there. Another day she drew a sun, orange, crooked, and not quite round but shining. And a week later, Mila handed Eve a drawing with 3 people, a grown woman with reddish-brown hair, a tiny baby, and a little girl in the middle holding both their hands. "That's us," Mila said, her voice small but clear. "You, Lily, and me." Eve had to turn away so Mila would not see her crying. Every night Mila demanded a lullaby. She refused to sleep without the song. She refused to close her eyes without Eve's voice moving through the dark. And Eve sang songs she had once sung to Lucas. Melodies her mother had once sung to her, singing until Mila drifted off, a small hand still gripping hers. One night, as Eve sang, she heard a strange sound. Laughter. Mila's soft giggle, breaking out when Eve deliberately sang a note wrong just to tease her. Clear, innocent, bright. The laughter of a normal 4-year-old child. Eve did not know that just outside the half-closed door, Dominic was standing there. He had stood there every night, quiet as a shadow, listening to Eve sing his daughter to sleep. And tonight, when Mila's laughter rose, Dominic felt his knees give way. He had to brace himself against the wall so he would not fall. 2 years. 730 nights without hearing his daughter laugh. 730 nights believing that sound had died with Elena. 730 nights lying alone in the dark, wondering whether he still deserved to be a father. And now that laughter was here, in this room, in this house, in his life, Dominic closed his eyes. He was not a man who prayed. He had done too many sinful things to believe anyone above would listen. But in this moment he offered a silent thanks. Thanks for the stranger woman on that night flight. Thanks that she came back. Thanks that she had pulled his daughter out of the darkness. He did not know who Eve truly was. He did not know what she was running from. But he knew one thing. He would not let anyone hurt her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was brave, though she was. But because she had done what his entire empire could not. She had made Mila laugh again. And to Dominic, that was worth more than everything. He stood outside the door a little longer, listening to Eve keep singing, listening to Mila hum along with the tune. And then he turned away in silence, walking into the darkness of the long hallway, carrying the sound of his daughter's laughter like a treasure in his chest. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Dominic Salvatore slept without nightmares. 2 weeks passed like a beautiful dream. 2 weeks of quiet mornings, warm meals, nights of lullabies and Mila's laughter. 2 weeks in which Eve almost forgot she was living in the house of a mafia boss. I almost forgot there was a ghost from her past hunting her. Almost forgot that happiness, for her, had never lasted. But the past never truly disappears. It only hides and waits, like a predator crouched in the dark. The message came at 3 a.m. Eve was asleep with Mila curled beside her and Lily breathing evenly in the crib. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen flashing in the darkness. Eve reached for it with her eyes half closed, thinking it was spam or some meaningless notification. She was wrong. Found you, bitch. That big house won't protect you. Eve was instantly awake. Her eyes went wide, locked on the screen as if the letters might vanish if she stared long enough. They did not vanish. They stayed there, black on white, like a death sentence. Ryan. Ryan had found her. She scrolled, her hands shaking so badly she could barely guide her fingers. Another message. Nice neighborhood. Lots of security. But you know me, Eve. I always find a way. And a photo. A photo of the mansion's iron gate, taken from outside, taken in daylight. Ryan had been here. He had stood in front of this house. He had looked in at the place where she was living. Eve wanted to scream, to sob, to leap out of bed, grab Lily and Mila, and run fast and far. But she could not move. She sat frozen, heart slamming, breath coming too hard and too fast. She had thought she was safe. She had believed the high walls and the guards would shield her. She had believed she had escaped. She was wrong. She was always wrong when she thought she could escape Ryan Mitchell. Mila shifted beside her. Eve, Mila's sleepy voice murmured. Why are you awake? Eve shut off the phone screen quickly, forcing a smile onto her lips even as they trembled. Nothing, sweetie. Go back to sleep. But Mila did not fall back asleep. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, looking at Eve with eyes far too sharp for her age, a child who had seen too much darkness to be fooled by a fake smile. You're scared, Mila said. Not as a question. Your hands are shaking. Eve looked down. It was true. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She could not hide it, could not pretend, could not protect Mila from her own fear. I have to go, Eve heard herself say, her voice distant, as if someone else were speaking through her. I have to leave. Tonight. Now. Mila stared at her, dark eyes wide, filling with another kind of fear, the fear Eve had seen on that night flight, the fear of being abandoned. No, Mila said, trembling. No, you can't go. Sweetie, I have to. There's a bad man looking for me. If I stay, I might put you in danger. Put Lily in danger. I can't." "No," Mila screamed, the sound ripping through the night's quiet. She threw herself into Eve, clinging as if Eve were already disappearing. You promised you'd stay. You can't leave me. Please. Please don't leave me like Mommy did." Eve felt her heart break apart. She held Mila, tears pouring down her own face. She did not know what to do, did not know what to choose. Staying meant putting everything in danger. Leaving meant breaking a child who had already been broken too many times. "I don't want to leave you," Eve whispered into Mila's hair. "I don't want to leave. But the bad man. Daddy will protect you," Mila cut in, her voice choked but certain. "Daddy protects everyone. He's strong. He'll make the bad man go away. Just tell him. Please, tell Daddy and don't leave me." Eve lifted her head. "Tell Dominic. Tell him about Ryan, about the past, about everything." She had kept it secret for 2 weeks, afraid that if he knew, he would send her away, afraid she would bring trouble to him and to his daughter. But now Ryan had found her. Now the danger was right outside the door, and she could not keep hiding. Lily began to cry in the crib, probably awakened by Mila's scream. Eve wiped her tears and stood, lifting Lily into her arms. She looked at Mila, who still gripped Eve's hand, eyes reddened and pleading. "Okay," Eve said, her voice trembling but decided. "Okay, I'll tell him. I'll tell your daddy everything." Mila let out a breath, her small shoulders easing. She did not let go of Eve's hand. "I'll go with you," she said. "I'll make sure you don't run away." Eve almost laughed through her tears. She nodded, letting Mila hold her hand, and they stepped out of the room. The hallway was dark and long. Night lights cast faint gold shadows along the walls. Eve walked with Mila at her side, and Lily in her arms toward Dominic's study. She knew he would still be awake. He was always awake at this hour, doing things she did not want to know about. This was the moment she would have to face him, face the truth, face the past she had been running from for so long. She stopped at the study door, light spilling from the gap beneath it. She took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Dominic's voice called from inside. Eve pushed the door open, stepped in, and met the steel-cold gray eyes watching her from behind the desk. He was sitting there, surrounded by papers and computer screens. But when he saw her, when he saw the panic on her face, when he saw Mila gripping her hand, he rose at once. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp and cold, but not directed at her, at whoever had made her afraid like this. Eve swallowed hard, and began to tell him. Eve stood in the middle of Dominic's study with Lily in her arms and Mila at her side, and she did not know where to begin. There was too much to tell, too much pain to dig up, too many secrets she had buried for years. Dominic did not rush her. He only stood there behind his desk, gray eyes on her with a patience she would not have expected from a man like him. He motioned for her to sit in the chair across from him. Eve sat down, legs shaking, hands shaking, everything shaking. "His name is Ryan Mitchell," she began, her voice rough. "He's my ex-husband. He's a cop. And he's been hunting me for almost a year." Dominic did not react. He did not frown. He did not question. He only listened. Eve went on, one word at a time, as if she were pulling stones out of her chest. "We were married for 5 years. At first, he was perfect. Charming, protective. Everyone loved him. His colleagues, his friends, my family." She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I was lucky. I thought I had found the one." Mila climbed onto the chair beside Eve and leaned her head against Eve's shoulder. She did not understand everything Eve was saying, but she understood pain, and she wanted to stay close. "Then Lucas was born," Eve said, and the moment the name left her mouth, her voice cracked. "My son, 4 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, the most beautiful thing I ever created." She drew a trembling breath. "He loved chocolate chip cookies, loved bedtime stories, loved asking why about everything." Tears began to fall, but Eve did not wipe them away. She let them drop, let them carry off what she had held back for too long. And Ryan killed him. Dominic still did not speak, but Eve saw his jaw tighten, saw the gray in his eyes darken by a shade. "It was a car accident," Eve said, her voice going flat as if she were telling someone else's story. "Ryan was drunk. He insisted on driving Lucas to get ice cream. I begged him not to. He hit me, took Lucas anyway." She closed her eyes and saw the crushed car behind her lids, clear as yesterday. They found the car an hour later, wrapped around a guardrail. Ryan walked away with scratches. Lucas, she could not continue. She did not need to. The silence spoke for her. Lily made a small sound against Eve's shoulder as if she could feel her sister's pain. Eve shifted the baby higher and patted her back, even as her own tears kept falling. There was no justice, she continued, her voice bitter. Ryan's cop friends covered for him, said the road was slick, said it was an accident, no charges, no trial, nothing. She opened her eyes and looked straight at Dominic. My son died, and his killer walked free because he wears a badge. Dominic nodded slowly. He understood. He lived in a world where the law was never fair, where power decided everything, where the men in uniform could be worse than the criminals. After Lucas, Eve said, and for the first time since her son died, she truly cried, not silent tears, but choking sobs, raw and breaking. I tried to end it. I swallowed a bottle of pills. My neighbor found me, saved me. She wiped her face with her sleeve, but the tears kept coming. Sometimes I wish she hadn't. Mila hugged her tighter. She did not understand the details, but she understood that Eve had wanted to follow her own mother, and the thought made her afraid. Then my mother died giving birth to Lily, Eve said, looking down at the baby. She left Lily for me. She gave me a reason to keep going. Eve kissed Lily's forehead. So I ran. I took Lily and ran. But Ryan won't let go. He says I'm his property. He says if he can't have me, no one will. She handed Dominic her phone, the screen still showing Ryan's messages. He found me. He's here. And I don't know what to do. Dominic looked at the messages, looked at the photo of his own gate, and when he raised his head, his eyes were no longer cold. They burned, a low fire, dangerous and deadly. He came around the desk and stopped in front of Eve. He did not touch her. He did not hold her. He only stood there, tall and solid as a wall. Look at me, he said, his voice low but absolute. Eve lifted her face, eyes swollen and wet. He won't touch you again, Dominic said, one word at a time, firm as a vow. I give you my word. As long as you are under my roof, no one will harm you. No one will harm Lily. No one will take you away from Mila. He paused, and in that moment Eve saw something in his eyes. Not pity, not judgment, but understanding. The quiet empathy of a man who had also lost someone he loved. I know what it's like to lose someone, to feel helpless, to blame yourself, he said softly. You're not alone anymore. Eve did not know what to say. She only nodded, tears still falling, but for the first time in a long time they were not only tears of pain, there was something else in them too, a small looseness in her chest, a hint of relief, a hint of hope. Dominic returned to his desk and picked up his phone. He dialed a number and waited. Marcus, he said when the other line answered, I need you to find everything on a man named Ryan Mitchell. He's a cop, based in New York. His eyes flicked to Eve. Everything. Where he lives, who he knows, what he's done, every skeleton in his closet. There was a pause while Marcus said something, and Dominic replied, his voice cold as ice. Yes, tonight. I want it on my desk by morning. He ended the call and looked at Eve. Go to sleep, he said, his voice gentler now. Take Mila and Lily. Rest. I'll handle this. Eve wanted to protest, to say she could not sleep, could not rest, could not be calm while Ryan was out there. But she was too tired, too drained, too hollow after spilling everything. She stood, Mila still holding her hand, Lily still in her arms. She moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Dominic. Thank you, she whispered. For listening, for not judging, for everything. Dominic nodded. Get some rest, Eve. Tomorrow we fight back. The next morning, Dominic sat in his study facing Marcus, and on the desk lay a thick stack of files, photographs, reports, and numbers. Evidence of a night Marcus had spent without sleep, and what he had found was worse than Dominic had imagined, because Marcus began in a low, serious voice, saying that Ryan Mitchell was a New York police officer, with 12 years on the force, clean on the surface, respected by colleagues. But if you dug deeper, then he slid a folder toward Dominic and said that Mitchell had been taking money from Kozlov since at least 5 years ago, and Dominic went rigid at the name, Kozlov cutting through him like a blade. Viktor Kozlov, the Russian Mafia boss who had ordered Elena killed, the man Dominic had hunted for 2 years without finding, and Dominic asked if Marcus was certain, his voice ice cold while something inside him boiled, and Marcus nodded and said he was certain that Ryan Mitchell was one of Kozlov's rats inside the police department, selling information, erasing evidence, warning ahead of raids, and in return Kozlov paid him very well. And then Marcus turned to the next page and added that there was more, that Ryan had sold information about Eve to Kozlov, her location, where she worked, the places she had run to, all of it, and Dominic frowned and asked why Kozlov would care about Eve. And Marcus went silent for a moment as if weighing his words, then said he was not sure, but it seemed Eve had something Kozlov wanted back or wanted destroyed. And Dominic stared down at the file and at Ryan Mitchell's photograph, an ordinary face with a friendly smile, the kind of face no one would look at and think belonged to a man who could kill a child, beat a wife, and sell his soul to the devil. But Dominic knew the most dangerous monsters always wore the mask of the ordinary, and he knew he needed to speak to Eve, needed to understand what she was hiding. So he found her in her room with Lily in the crib and Mila beside her drawing. And when Dominic stepped in, Eve looked up and he saw the dark circles under her eyes. She had not slept last night, and neither had he. And Dominic said her name more gently than usual and told her he needed to ask something, whether the name Kozlov meant anything to her. And Eve turned pale and went rigid as if ice water had been poured over her, and Dominic knew then that she did know, that she was hiding something tied to his enemy. And he said she knew him, not as a question but as a fact, and told her to tell him, and Eve closed her eyes as memory surged like a flood and dragged her back to the night Lucas died, remembering herself standing at the hospital window looking down at the parking lot, waiting for Ryan to come in, because she had just been told her son did not make it, and she had wanted Ryan beside her, wanted someone to hold her, wanted not to face that pain alone. But instead of entering the hospital, Ryan had stopped his car in a shadowed corner of the lot, where another car was already waiting, a sleek black Mercedes, and a man stepped out with silver hair and a long coat and handed Ryan a briefcase, and Ryan opened it, checked it, then nodded. Money, a whole case full of it. While her son had just died, and her husband was taking money from someone right outside the hospital, and Eve said she had not understood then, not why, not from whom, not what was happening, but her instincts had told her to take pictures, and she had used her phone to zoom in and capture every moment. The silver-haired man's face, the money, Ryan smiling while their son lay cold on an operating table, and Eve said that later she learned the man was Viktor Kozlov, that Ryan had worked for him for a long time, and that night Ryan was not drunk, he did it on purpose. And she opened her eyes and looked at Dominic with raw pain and said she did not know why, did not know what Lucas had done or seen. But Ryan had deliberately killed her son and Kozlov had paid for it, and Dominic felt fury flare in his chest, not only for Eve, but because he had found a new piece of the puzzle of Elena, Kozlov, every road leading back to Kozlov. And he asked if she had proof, forcing his voice to stay steady, and Eve nodded and said she had photos and video, that she had copied everything onto a USB drive. Then she paused and looked toward the crib where Lily slept and said, Ryan knew she had it. That was why he hunted her. Not because he loved her or wanted her back, but because he was afraid she would hand the evidence to someone, afraid he and Kozlov would be exposed. And Dominic asked where the USB was, and Eve stood and walked to Lily's crib and carefully lifted out an old teddy bear, the one Lily always held while sleeping, the one Eve had kept since Lucas was alive, and she said it was Lucas's teddy bear, that after her son died she kept it, and when she decided to run, she hid the USB inside it, because no one would think to look inside a baby's toy, and she turned the bear and showed a small stitched seam along its back. And Dominic looked at the bear, then at Eve, then at Lily sleeping, and understood that this woman had been carrying a ticking bomb for so long, a bomb that could destroy Kozlov, bring justice for Lucas, and maybe, just maybe, help him avenge Elena. And he said her name with a low finality, and told her this evidence could change everything. That Kozlov was the one who killed his wife, the one who stole Mila's voice for 2 years, and now he was working with Ryan to hunt Eve, and Dominic said they shared an enemy and he had a proposal. And Eve looked at him and waited, and Dominic told her to let him protect her, protect Lily, protect the evidence, and when the time came they would end Kozlov and Ryan together, once and for all. And Eve stared into Dominic's gray eyes and saw the resolve there, the anger, the grief of a husband who had lost his wife and a father who had lost his daughter's laughter, and she knew that in this moment they were no longer strangers leaning on each other only because circumstance demanded it. They were allies, 2 people carrying the same kind of wound, 2 people facing the same enemy, and she answered in a small, steady voice that she agreed. That night, after the conversation with Dominic, Eve could not sleep. She lay on the bed staring up at the black ceiling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. Kozlov, Ryan, the USB hidden inside a teddy bear, a web of crime she had stumbled into without meaning to, and now she was caught in the middle of it with no way back. Lily slept quietly in the crib. Mila lay beside Eve, curled up like a kitten, breathing steady. The room was still. Only a faint wind brushing the window and the hard thud of Eve's own heartbeat in her chest. Then a scream tore the night open. "Mommy!" Eve bolted upright. Mila was sitting up in bed, eyes wide but seeing nothing, wailing inside a nightmare. Sweat slicked her forehead. Her hands clawed at the air as if she were trying to grab someone who kept slipping away. "Mommy! Mommy, don't go. Please don't go. Mommy!" Eve pulled her close, gathering Mila into her arms and holding tight. "Shh, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm here. You're safe." But Mila could not hear her. She was trapped in it, reliving that night 2 years ago, watching her mother fall, calling out and getting nothing back. "Mommy, wake up. Please wake up. Don't leave me. Mommy." Mila's crying broke into pieces, so raw it made Eve start to cry too. She held the child tighter, humming, whispering, doing everything she could, but the nightmare would not let go. A shadow filled the doorway. Dominic. He stood there in a wrinkled shirt, hair tousled, gray eyes wide. He had heard his daughter scream and run straight here, but now he stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Eve looked at him, looked into the helplessness in the eyes of the most powerful man she had ever met. He could command hundreds of people. He could control an entire underworld empire. He could make enemies tremble with a single look. But he did not know how to hold his daughter. He did not know how to comfort her. He did not know how to be a father. "Dominic!" Eve called, her voice tight but firm. "Come here." He did not move. His feet seemed nailed to the floor. "She needs you," Eve said, staring him down. "She needs her father, not me. You." Dominic swallowed hard. He wanted to come closer. He wanted to hold his child, but he was afraid. Afraid Mila would push him away. Afraid he would make it worse. Afraid he did not deserve to. "Dominic," Eve said again, softer now. "She's calling for her mommy because she thinks that's the only one who can comfort her. But her mommy is gone. And you're still here. You're all she has. Please." Mila kept crying, kept calling for her mother, trembling in Eve's arms, and Dominic finally stepped forward. He sat on the bed near Mila but did not touch her. He did not know what to do with his hands. He did not know what to say. 2 years of distance. 2 years of silence. 2 years of being the worst kind of father. Eve loosened her hold gently and guided Mila toward him. "Mila, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Daddy's here to protect you." Mila opened her eyes. Dark brown, blurred with tears. She looked at Eve and then at Dominic. She shivered, breathing fast. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. Dominic felt his heart stop. It was the first time in 2 years Mila had called him. The first time she looked at him as if he truly existed. "I'm here, Principessa," he said, his voice shaking. "Daddy's here. I'm not going anywhere." And then the thing Dominic had not dared to hope for happened. Mila threw herself into him, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed into his chest, and she cried, not the crying of a nightmare, but the crying of a child who had finally found safety. "Don't leave me, Daddy," she sobbed. "Please don't leave me like Mommy did." Dominic held her, held tight as if she might vanish if he loosened his grip for even a second, and he cried, the first time since the night Elena died, the first time in 2 years. His tears fell into Mila's black hair, hot and salty. "I won't leave you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Never. I promise. Daddy will always be here. Always." Eve sat beside them, tears sliding down her own face, but she did not intrude. This was their moment. Father and daughter, the moment they had lost for 2 years, the moment they were finally finding again. Lily woke in the crib, but she did not cry. The baby only lay there and stared up at the ceiling as if she understood this was not the time to demand attention. They stayed that way for a long time, Dominic holding Mila, Eve sitting close, the darkness around them no longer cold. Something had shifted. A wall had fallen. A door had opened. When Mila finally drifted back to sleep in her father's arms, Dominic lifted his head and looked at Eve. His eyes were red, his cheeks were wet, but in his gaze there was something new, something Eve had not seen before, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them dared to name yet. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough. "Thank you for giving her back to me." Eve only nodded. She did not need thanks. She only needed to know that this child and this man had finally found their way back to each other. 3 days after the nightmare, everything seemed to be getting better. slowly, carefully, the way a bruise fades when you stop pressing on it. Mila had begun speaking to Dominic, even if only in short phrases, simple words. But it was a huge step. She no longer avoided him, no longer looked at him like a stranger, and every night before bed she insisted on having both Eve and Dominic with her, as if she needed them both in the room to feel safe. That morning Dominic had to go to a meeting, an important meeting with allies about expanding territory. He did not want to go. He did not want to leave Mila and Eve, especially knowing Ryan and Kozlov were still out there. But Marcus had doubled security, 12 guards on the estate, cameras on every corner. No one could break in, or so Dominic believed. "I'll be back before tonight," he told Eve before he left, standing in her doorway. "Marcus will be here. If anything happens, find him." Eve nodded, Lily in her arms, Mila beside her holding her hand. "We'll be fine. Go." Dominic looked at them for a long moment. 3 figures, 2 children and a woman, the people who had become everything to him without him realizing when it happened. He wanted to say something. He wanted to hold them, but he only nodded, turned, and walked away. It was the biggest mistake of his life. The attack came that afternoon. No gunshots, no warning, only gas released into the ventilation system, and one by one the guards went down in silence. Professional, ruthless, efficient. This was not a random break-in. This was a planned operation. Eve was in the room with Mila and Lily when she heard a strange sound, something falling, then silence. A silence that felt wrong, a silence that made the hair on her arms rise. She stood and went to the door, and the moment she opened it, a large hand clamped over her mouth and yanked her out into the hall. Mila screamed, "Eve!" But the scream was cut off when another man rushed into the room and grabbed the little girl. Lily began to wail in the crib. Chaos, terror, and Eve could do nothing. She was pinned, a sharp chemical smell forced into her nose, and the world began to blur. The last thing she heard before the dark took her was Mila calling her name, and a cold voice speaking Russian. Marcus found them too late. When he charged toward Eve's room after the alarm, he was ambushed, 4 attackers. He dropped 2 before a bullet tore into his shoulder, and another punched through his abdomen. He went down, blood spreading across the white marble floor, and could only watch as the enemy dragged Eve, Mila, and Lily away, powerless to stop it. Dominic got the news in the middle of the meeting. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He opened it, and his heart stopped. A photograph. Eve tied to a chair, eyes closed, blood seeping from a cut on her forehead. Mila on a concrete floor, sobbing, her wrist cuffed to a pipe. Lily inside a box, crying until her voice turned raw. And beneath the photo, a single line. "The evidence, or I kill them all. You have 6 hours, Salvatore." Dominic stood up so fast the chair crashed backward. The people in the meeting room stared at him, confused, alarmed, but he did not look at them. He looked only at the photograph, at Mila's face, at the tears on his daughter's cheeks. He called Marcus. No answer. He called the estate. No answer. He called every guard, one by one. No answer. Then his phone buzzed again, this time a video call. He accepted, and Viktor Kozlov's face filled the screen. His enemy, the man who killed Elena, the man who had turned his daughter into a silent child, the man Dominic had hunted for 2 years. And now he was smiling at Dominic from somewhere unknown, with Dominic's family in his hands. "Salvatore," Kozlov said, his Russian heavy, his voice cold as ice. "Long time no see." "Kozlov," Dominic growled, gripping the phone so hard the casing creaked. "If you touch them, even a single hair." Calm down," Kozlov cut in, still smiling. "I'm a businessman, not a monster. I don't want to hurt them. I just want what's mine." The camera turned. Eve was awake now, eyes wide, her mouth sealed with tape. Mila was still crying, her small face flushed red. Lily was still screaming inside the box. "USB," Kozlov said as the camera swung back to his face. "She has a USB with some very sensitive things on it. Bring it to me within 6 hours, and I give them back. Not in the same condition as before, perhaps, but still breathing." Dominic's teeth ground together. "Where?" Kozlov smiled. "I'll send the address. Come alone, Salvatore. No guards, no guns, just you and the USB." He tilted his head, cruelty sharpening his gaze. "And if I see any sign of a trap..." The camera swung back to Mila, and Kozlov's hand reached in and seized her chin, forcing her to face the lens. "This little girl dies first, slowly, painfully, like her mother." Mila screamed through the tape, the sound muffled, desperate, terrified. "Okay," Dominic roared, his voice cracking. "All right, I'll come. Alone. With the USB, just don't touch my child." Kozlov released Mila and smiled, satisfied. "Good. 6 hours, Salvatore. The clock is running." The screen went dark. Dominic stood there in the silent meeting room, surrounded by allies and men who answered to him, and yet he had never felt so alone. He looked at the photo of Eve, Mila, and Lily again, at his daughter's tears, at Eve's wound, and then he turned and faced the men in the room. "Cancel everything," he said, his voice ice-cold and burning at once. "Gather everyone. We have 6 hours to save them." 5 hours and 45 minutes after Kozlov's call, Dominic stood in front of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Night fully fallen, a moonless sky pressing down, only the weak yellow wash of streetlights spilling onto an empty road, and he came alone as Kozlov demanded. No bodyguards, no army, just him, a handgun hidden at his waist, and the USB in his jacket pocket. But what Kozlov did not know was that Dominic's team had been surrounding the warehouse since 3 hours earlier, tucked into the darkness, waiting for a signal. Because Dominic had not come to surrender, he had come to end it. Inside, Eve sat on the freezing concrete with her back against a steel pillar, her hands still tied behind her. Mila curled beside her with her head on Eve's thigh, trembling from fear and cold, and Lily lay in Eve's arms. The baby cried to exhaustion and now only whimpered in weak little bursts, the three of them huddled together, and even with her wrists bound, Eve tried to shield the children with her own body, not knowing whether Dominic would come, not knowing if they would live, but certain of one thing, that if anyone tried to touch Mila and Lily, they would have to step over her dead body first. Through the hours of captivity, Eve had watched and waited and searched for a chance, and she found one, a small pair of scissors on the floor near the pillar, probably forgotten long ago, and she used her foot to nudge it closer, then hid it up her sleeve when no one was looking, a tiny weapon that might not be enough to save them, but enough to fight. The warehouse door screeched open, and Dominic stepped inside, his tall frame cutting a black silhouette against the light behind him, coming in alone with his hands raised as if unarmed, gray eyes sweeping the cavernous space, searching, and when he saw Eve and Mila, his jaw locked tight. They were alive, and that was all that mattered. Kozlov emerged from the shadows with 5 gunmen behind him, and at his side stood Ryan Mitchell, and nausea rose in Eve the moment she saw her ex-husband, standing there in his police uniform with a smug smile. As if this were a victory, Kozlov addressed Dominic with satisfied calm, calling him Salvatore and praising his punctuality, and Dominic held up the USB and demanded they be released. But Kozlov sneered and told him to slow down and hand it to Ryan to verify it was what he wanted, and Ryan stepped forward, ripped the USB from Dominic's hand, plugged it into a laptop, opened files and checked, and minutes stretched in tight silence until Ryan nodded and said it was all there. The photos, the video, the documents. And Kozlov said good, then drew his gun and aimed it at Dominic and ordered his men to kill him. And Dominic was not surprised because he had known Kozlov would betray him, and that was why he had a plan B. But before anyone could move, Kozlov spun and seized Mila, yanking her up as a human shield. Mila screamed and kicked, but Kozlov's large hand clamped hard around her throat, and he roared at Dominic not to do anything stupid, gun pressed to Mila's head, warning that one more step and the girl would die. And Dominic froze as every plan and calculation dissolved, because his daughter was in his enemy's hands, and one small mistake would kill her, just like Elena, just like that night 2 years ago. And Mila sobbed for her father, crying daddy and begging for help through the choke of Kozlov's grip. And Dominic demanded his child be released, voice shaking with threat as he offered anything, territory, money, everything, if Kozlov would only let her go. But Kozlov laughed, and said what he wanted was Dominic dead, because Dominic had destroyed his empire for 2 years, killed his men, taken his territory, and now he would take what Dominic treasured most, the way Dominic had taken from him, and Kozlov tightened his hand until Mila began to turn purple. That was when Eve moved, not thinking, not weighing, only acting, because somehow she had managed to loosen her bonds while everyone's attention stayed fixed on Dominic. And she lunged at Kozlov from behind with the scissors in her hand and drove them straight into his shoulder blade, and Kozlov howled and released Mila, who collapsed to the floor coughing and gasping. Everything then happened in a blink. Dominic drew the gun from his waist and fired 2 shots, and Kozlov dropped with 1 bullet in his chest and 1 in his head, and Ryan lifted his weapon, but he was a fraction too slow, and Dominic fired 2 more shots and Ryan fell backward, eyes wide with disbelief as blood spread across his chest. The 5 gunmen raised their weapons, but the warehouse door burst open and Dominic's team flooded in, gunfire cracking, shouting, then silence. Dominic rushed to Mila and pulled her into his arms, and she shook and sobbed, but she was alive, still breathing, still here with him, clinging to his neck and choking out that she had been so scared, and Dominic whispered that he knew, calling her Principessa as tears slid into her hair, telling her it was over now. All of it over. Eve sat on the floor with Lily in her arms, breathing hard, Kozlov's blood smeared on her hands and her clothes, and she stared at Ryan's body, the man who had killed her son, who had tormented her for years, now lying motionless in a pool of blood, and she felt nothing. No triumph, no agony, only emptiness, and something that was almost peace. Dominic came to her with Mila still held close, and with his free hand he helped Eve to her feet, and when he looked into her eyes she saw a promise in the gray, a promise that everything would be all right, that they had made it through, that from now on no one would be able to hurt them again. And he said it was over in a voice rough but steady, telling her they were gone, both of them forever, and Eve nodded, and for the first time in many years she believed it, because the nightmare had ended. Ryan was dead, Kozlov was dead, the past was dead, and she, Mila, Lily, and Dominic were still alive, still here, still together, and that was all that mattered. A wash of white light was the first thing Eve saw when she opened her eyes, too bright, painfully bright, and she shut them again, then opened them slowly once more, letting her vision adjust inch by inch. White ceiling, white walls, white curtains, the familiar bite of disinfectant, the steady beep of a monitor beside her. A hospital. She was in a hospital. Memory rushed back like floodwater. The warehouse. Kozlov. Ryan. Gunshots. Blood. Mila screaming. Lily crying. Then darkness. And Eve tried to sit up in panic, but her body would not obey. Pain everywhere. And then she felt a warm hand close around hers, holding her still. Easy. Don't move. Dominic's voice. Rough and exhausted. But here, right beside her. Eve turned her head. Dominic sat in the chair next to the bed, leaning toward her, one hand holding hers, the other braced on the mattress rail. He looked terrible. Stubble on his jaw, deep bruised shadows under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled as if he had been wearing it for days. But his gray eyes brightened when he saw her awake, and in that instant he looked like a man being saved. Mila? Lily? Eve whispered, her throat raw and dry. They're fine, Dominic said at once. Mila is in the room next door with the nanny. Lily is sleeping in her crib. They're both safe. No one is hurt. Eve exhaled and closed her eyes, letting tears fall. They were safe. The children were safe. That was all that mattered. You've been asleep for 3 days, Dominic said gently. The doctors said you lost blood, you were exhausted, and you were in shock. They had to keep you sedated so your body could recover. 3 days. She had slept for 3 days. Eve looked down at her hand, at Dominic's fingers still wrapped around it, and something inside her shifted. You've been sitting here for 3 days, she asked. Dominic did not answer. He did not have to. The exhaustion in his face, the chair with a pillow and blanket tossed across it, the cold coffee cup on the bedside table, all of it answered for him. You should go home and rest, Eve said. You look like you're about to collapse. I'm not going anywhere, Dominic said, his voice firm. Not with anger, but with determination. Not when you need someone here. Eve wanted to argue, wanted to say she did not need anyone, that she had lived alone for years, that she could take care of herself, but the words would not come, because for the first time in a very long time, she did not want to be alone anymore. They sat in silence for a while, the monitor's rhythm steady, late afternoon sun leaking through the curtains and laying pale gold shadows on the wall. And then Dominic spoke again, low and sincere. Eve, he said, meeting her eyes, I know you've been through too much. Losing Lucas, enduring Ryan, running, and now all of this. He paused, swallowing hard. I don't have the right to ask anything from you. I'm Mafia. I've done terrible things. I'm not a good man. Eve watched him and waited. But I want you to know one thing, Dominic continued, his voice trembling slightly. I don't want you to love me. I don't deserve your love. I just want— He stopped as if searching for the words. I just want you to stay. Stay. With Mila. With Lily. With— And he did not say with me, but the word hung in the air between them. Eve looked at him, at those tired gray eyes that were still honest, at the man who had sat by her bed for 3 days and would not leave, the man who had killed to protect her, who had given her shelter when the world turned its back, who was begging her to stay not with a mafia boss's pride but with a lonely man's humility. She did not love him. Not yet. Maybe never. Or maybe one day. She did not know. But she knew one thing. She did not want to go. Did not want to return to a life of running and fear and being alone. Did not want to leave Mila, the child who had called her light. Did not want to leave Dominic, the man who had shown her that even in darkness there could be redemption. Eve nodded, slowly, decisively. "Okay," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I'll stay." Dominic closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged as if a massive weight had been lifted. He did not speak. He only squeezed her hand tighter, and when he opened his eyes again, something wet shimmered in the gray. The hospital door swung open. Mila ran in, a nanny behind her trying to stop her. Mila rushed to the bed, climbed up, and threw her arms around Eve. "You're awake," Mila burst out, her face glowing. "I was so worried. Daddy said you were sleeping, but you slept so long and I was scared you wouldn't wake up like Mommy didn't wake up, but you did and you're here." Eve hugged her, tears falling into the smooth black hair. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm not going anywhere." Mila lifted her head, dark brown eyes suddenly solemn in a way too old for her age. "Are you staying forever now?" she asked. "Like forever. With me and Daddy and Lily." Eve glanced toward Dominic. He was watching them, and on that exhausted face, for the first time she saw a smile. Not the cold smile of a mafia boss, but the smile of a father, of a man who had found hope again. Eve looked back at Mila. "Forever is a long time, sweetheart," she said gently. Mila did not waver. "That's okay," the little girl said, dead serious. "I have lots of cookies to share." Eve laughed, the first laugh in days, and in that stark white hospital room, surrounded by disinfectant and the steady beep of machines, she felt something she had thought she had lost forever. Hope, and something that felt almost like happiness. 1 year later, Griffith Park in Los Angeles at sunset, the sky shifting from blue to orange, then to pink, then to purple, the last light of day spilling across the green grass and turning everything to gold. A soft evening breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut lawn and the distant laughter of children at play, that most beautiful hour when the world seems to pause for a moment, to breathe, to look, to feel grateful. Eve sat on a picnic blanket spread over the grass with Lily in her lap, babbling her first words, 18 months old now, toddling on unsteady feet, able to say Eve even if it came out as E, and grinning wide every time she saw Mila, because life had changed so much in the past year. The Beverly Hills mansion was still there, but it was no longer cold. Laughter had returned to rooms that once held only silence. Lullabies rose every night. Mila calling Daddy every morning, Lily crying for food and hugs and play, the sounds of living, the sounds of family. Mila was running across the lawn chasing a yellow butterfly, 5 years old now, taller and stronger, and most of all happier, talking all day long, asking 1,000 questions, telling endless stories about preschool, about friends, about the neighbor's cat, still having nightmares sometimes but less and less, and when they came she knew someone would be there when she woke. Dominic stood a few steps away with his back to Eve, looking out toward the horizon, changed, still a mafia boss and still running his empire, but coming home earlier, eating dinner with his family, reading to Mila before bed, learning to say I love you even if the words still felt awkward, learning to hold someone without a reason, learning how to be present. He turned and walked back to Eve, and in his hands was a small box wrapped in tissue paper covered in clumsy star drawings, clearly Mila's work. Eve looked up, surprised, and asked what it was. Dominic sat beside her and set the box between them, then lifted the lid, and inside were star-shaped cookies. Not perfect. Some a little burned at the edges, some lopsided, some too thick, some too thin. But they were there, made by hand, made with love, made with effort. Dominic said he had learned to make them, that it took 6 months, that he burned the kitchen twice, that Mila had to taste at least 30 failed batches. But finally, and he looked down at the cookies and admitted they were not like Elena's and never could be, but he hoped they were good enough too. And he stopped, lifted his eyes to Eve's, and in those tired gray eyes she saw the question he had wanted to ask for a year but had been afraid to. Dominic picked up 1 star cookie and held it with both hands as if it were more precious than anything in his empire. Then he offered it to Eve and spoke in a voice low and slightly unsteady. "If I share this, will you stay?" Eve looked at the cookie, at the faint tremor in the hands of the most powerful man she had ever met, at the gray eyes waiting for her answer with a fear he could not hide. A year ago on that night flight from New York to Los Angeles, a 4-year-old girl had asked her the same question, had placed a star-shaped cookie in her hands, had changed her life forever. Eve took the cookie and then she took Dominic's hand too, squeezing gently as she said she had been staying since the moment Mila asked. And she would keep staying, not because of the cookie, not because of the house or the safety or anything he could give her, but because this was where she belonged, beside Mila, beside Lily, beside him. Dominic closed his eyes, and he did not cry, but when he opened them something had changed, a weight released, a fear dissolving, and he lifted Eve's hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, whispering thank you for everything. Footsteps pattered through the grass and Mila came running, black hair flying, cheeks flushed with happiness, and she blurted out, "Did she say yes? Daddy, did she say yes?" And Dominic nodded with a smile spreading across his mouth as he told her yes, Principessa. And Mila squealed and wrapped her arms around both Eve and Dominic at once, shouting that now they could have cookies forever, forever, and ever, and ever. Then she looked up at Eve with shining eyes and asked if she was staying forever now, like forever, forever. And Eve laughed through tears that were happy this time and told her forever, forever, sweetheart. Lily clapped her hands even though she did not understand what was happening. She only knew everyone was smiling and hugging and happy, and that was enough. They sat there, the 4 of them, on a picnic blanket in the middle of the park, eating star-shaped cookies and watching the sun go down. Not perfect. Mila still having nightmares sometimes. Eve still crying sometimes when Lucas came back to her in memory. Dominic still Mafia with secrets and shadows he could not share. Lily still a baby with an unknown future ahead. But they had each other. They had evenings like this. They had star-shaped cookies. They had the simple question that started it all. If I share my cookie, will you stay? And sometimes that is all it takes. A cookie, a question, a choice to stay, and a miracle follows. They were not perfect, but they were full. And sometimes full is all we need. This story is not only about love between a mafia boss and a woman running from her past. It is a story about healing, about finding family in places you never expected, about learning to open your heart after it has been hurt too many times, about giving without asking for anything back and receiving more than you ever dared to dream. Mila taught us that sometimes the smallest people have the biggest hearts, that a shared cookie can change an entire life, that presence, simply being there, can be worth more than any material gift. Eve taught us that even when life pushes you to the bottom, there is always a reason to stand back up, that loss does not mean the end, that you can find new purpose, new love, a new family even when you think you have lost everything. And Dominic taught us that it is never too late to change, that even the hardest men still need love, that being a father is not about power or money but about presence, about being there when your child needs you, about learning to say I love you even if you forgot the words long ago. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss the most compelling videos every day. Please like this video and share it with your friends and loved ones, so these meaningful stories can reach more people. We want to hear what you felt. What did you think of this story? Was there a moment that made you cry? Was there a character you especially related to? Did this story remind you of something in your real life? Please share in the comments below. We read every comment and truly want to listen to what you carry in the deepest part of your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for being with us in today's story. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video, where a new story is waiting to touch your heart.